So hi everyone, thank you all for being here. I know everyone's super hungry, so we'll try and keep this as engaging as possible. My name's Thomas Giazza. I work for Mopub as a business development manager. For the ones that aren't familiar with Mopub, Mopub is Twitter's ad monetization platform. So today we're going to be discussing how a hybrid monetization approach, so a balance between in-app purchases and in-game ads, can drive growth for your games and create a sustainable revenue strategy. Before we dive deep into our topic, I would like to thank these three amazing panelists that joined us today. And I would like to ask you guys to introduce yourselves, introduce your company, and also give us a fun fact about yourself. Something fun about me is that this is my first panel as a moderator. So please be gentle. Nate, do you want to start?
Hi, my name is Nate Barker. I'm the Director of Business Development at Fluffy Fairy Games. Fluffy Fairy Games is the creator of Idle Miner Tycoon. We just passed 50 million downloads, which we're really excited about. And I guess a fun fact about me is that I used to play the bagpipes competitively back in high school. That's what I've got.
Hi, I'm Friederike Rasche from Flair Games, mobile games publisher based in Karlsruhe, Germany. I'm a brand manager, and fun fact about me, well, yesterday I confirmed my learning that I have the relatively useless but proficient skill of renditioning Finnish songs in karaoke very accurately. Understandable to natives, apparently. Don't know what to do with that, but it's great.
I know, we should make a band.
Hey guys, my name is Matej Lančarič and I work as the head of mobile marketing, but recently I changed company. I worked before with Pixel Federation, but now I'm with Boombit. And a fun fact about me, I have a Powerpuff Girls tattoo on my chest.
So to kick things off, I've got a question for all of you. So how do you balance between in-app purchases and in-game ads?
Cool. So in our game, we actually started out with just in-game ads when we first launched our MVP. And the way that the game has evolved over time is that we focus on certain types of rewards for in-game ads and then certain types of things that you get through in-app purchases. At the moment now, I can share that the split revenue-wise is about 50-50. There's obviously like a very different split between the percentage of people that are engaging with one versus the other. But I can say specifically in idle games where the two levers that you can pull are time versus revenue, or time versus money. So for instance, the speed that you're getting paid out, or the how long it takes to build something, etc. We try to have different rewards for the two different, I guess, monetization types. So things that are like really simple rewards, just like increasing your revenue over a short amount of time. That all is from ads. Anything where you're getting premium currency or permanent rewards, which are certain characters we have in the game, that comes from primarily from in-app purchases.
Would you guys want to add something to that?
Yeah, so in Flair Games, the titles in our portfolio historically were very strong in IP revenue. That the first title that really changed that fundamentally was Non-Stop Night, also an idle game, similar split between IP and ad revenue of like 50-50. And yeah, so now we have more titles coming, and there we see that ad monetization and some is going to be even more a focus, like more than 50%.
Yeah, well, while I was at the Pixel Federation, all the Pixel Federation games started as Facebook Canvas games. So back then, there was no rewarded videos. So all games were focused more on IIPs. And nowadays, we try to find the balance between like 70% versus 30%, maybe. But all new games are going to be like focused more on IPs, so more like 50-50 balance.
Amazing. And this leads me to my next question. So how do you calculate this balance? Do you use different metrics for understanding IAP performance versus ad performance?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything comes down to, of course, just like your lifetime value for the players. And I think we spoke earlier, there's some more things that we want to talk about how that's calculated. But generally with IAPs, it's pretty standard, right? You have the purchase percentage, there's the just like the average revenue per user. Maybe you look at it through the average revenue per daily active. And we struggled initially when it came to how we were measuring ad revenue performance. So my prior background is at an ad network. So the way that I used to always look at ad performance was really through just the ECPMs, right? The effective or estimated cost per 1,000 impressions. But what we found when we were doing that is that it was subject to a lot of like day-to-day change. We'd see if we were using a mediator that like one network was going up and then the other one was down. It was kind of hard to normalize, at least in our minds, and think about how much value we were deriving from individual players, because we were always thinking in terms of just impressions, right? So what we ended up doing is switching to the average revenue per daily engaged users. So not the average revenue per daily active, which is going to be subject to how many people are clicking on your ads, but just the players that are actually engaging with our ads. We only use rewarded video and rewarded playables, so it was really easy to focus on that. And that's now kind of our guiding light when it comes to optimizing our ad mediation.
Yeah, I think there is two sides to that, and that's one is how do you calculate the revenue that is generated from that, but also basically the game health and how it is impacted by ads. So basically, what we're looking at is how many, like, what percentage of DAUs is engaging with ads, how many are they watching, and what is the impact on retention, for example, or of course IAP revenue as well, and balancing that.
Yeah, well, all you mentioned, but I would like to say that at Pixel Federation, like I mentioned, we were focused more on IAPs, but then we tried to A/B test the monetization point for like if the ads are going to be like hurting the IAPs. So we tried to look at the day 28 ARPU, and then we found out that the ads actually hurting the revenue. So we are trying to balance that out.
Amazing. So moving to the next question, what type of ad formats currently fit the games, your games, and the ones that you're currently developing? Are you guys able to share with us what ad formats you use and why?
Sure. So I've heard a really good stat. Which is that if your rewarded video engagement is anything less than like 40%, it's a really good opportunity to use interstitials in order to generate revenue. Fortunately for us, our engagement is somewhere in like the 60-something%. So we haven't done any interstitials, we haven't done any banners. At the moment, we're only using rewarded video and rewarded playables. And we found that this has been the best for us in terms of monetization, if only because it's the only thing we've tried. But it's certainly something that is measurable for us in the other way that we look at how our ads are performing, which is in the ratings of the games. So we're really sensitive to how the game is being rated or reviewed. And so this is the one that for us is like super safe when it comes to ensuring that there is a like smooth player experience.
Yeah, we also focus on rewarded video ads. So there's no interstitials or something like that, because we've seen, and I think that everyone knows that it has an impact on the perceived quality, or can have, and that is a risk we do not want to take. And also, yeah, people do engage with the rewarded videos very actively. We see similar numbers of like DAU percentage can be 50%, can go up to 70. So there's no need for us to force our users to watch the ads, because they are engaging with them anyway, because the placement is well done.
Yeah, actually, we also started with rewarded video, but then we thought about interstitials as well. But now we are trying to get better engagement rate for rewarded videos, and then if we can implement as well interstitials, then we can do that as well.
Amazing, thanks for that. The next one's specifically for you, Nate. I've done a bit of research, and in an interview you released, you mentioned that you need to make sure that when people come back to the game, they're immediately given a very lucrative offer to watch a video. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Sure. So I mentioned earlier that the primary levers that are pulled in an idle game are going to be in speed, time, as well as in the payouts. So one of the big things for us, because it's an idle game where people are accruing revenue while they're outside of the game, is that once they come back, they're incentivized to watch an ad that delivers a multiplier on that revenue that they got while they were out of the game. So it's a 2x multiplier. It's only available once, and it covers from when they left the game until arriving back in the game. And so beyond just being something that is important for their gameplay and it is important for us to get ads in front of players, it's also really important for the advertisers, right? Because they want to get somebody, they want to know when the first impression is going to be, so we can measure that since there's only one of these, and we can get we can optimize to encourage people to watch those. If they're not watching enough of them, we could increase the rates that they're getting paid out. At the moment, 2x has been generally fine for us, but it's the most lucrative reward, and it basically delivers on like the maybe one of the aspects of the game that is a bit punishing, which is that you earn less money while you're outside of it than you would if you had it open on your desk running continuously for 24 hours.
And for rewarded video specifically, at Mopub, we've heard from some of our partners that they've been getting requests from users for more rewarded video ads. Is this something you guys have encountered as well?
Yeah, so definitely on our end, there are users who are like heavily engaged with the ads, and we cap them. We play around with the capping as well quite a bit to see what's the ideal balance. If you have, for example, a non-paying user, then there is less problem with giving them more ads because, of course, there's always the risk of if the rewarded video is incentive or the rewards of that video are incentive enough for the player to watch the ad, it has a value, and that can always cannibalize IP revenue, so you have to be careful with that. But we do see that, yes, of course, because the rewards are worth it, people do engage a lot with the ads, and they are asking for more. Yes, and when something is not working, then they complain that.
Yeah, actually, when we tested IAPs versus ad monetization, our segmentation was from level 10 until level 50, and then we found out in Google Play comments and reviews like, hey, where are the video rewards? Get it back. So people complained a lot about not having the videos in the game.
So I believe you all played with frequency capping to try and find a sweet spot. Have you guys found a sweet spot for the amount of rewarded videos that you like to show to your users?
Yeah, so we've built in frequency capping a few different ways. I'll tell you now, like the sweet spots for us has been about 8 ads per user per day. And kind of the way the frequency capping works in our game is that there's a reward when they first enter, which I mentioned earlier, and then the other type of reward that you get on a typical day-to-day basis, since there are some that you can only get sometimes, but the other reward that you get on a typical basis is to watch ads in the game to increase a multiplier on earnings in the future. So you watch an ad and you get 4 hours of 2x revenue, but we cap that at about 32 hours. So it limits the total amount that people are watching, and usually what happens is they watch their entry ad, and then they watch a few of those, and then they basically stop watching, finish playing the game, and come back the next day.
Yeah, I think so. We have also, like, I think with some games we ended up at like capping at 8, but it's also, yeah, again, important to see that you are trying not to make some people watch a lot of ads, but all of them watch at least one. This is why having that multiplier in the beginning is great. we've played around with some implementations to basically get this first ad impression from as many users as possible, because that is the one that is the most valuable to the advertisers and therefore gets the highest revenue.
Yeah, we played with the frequency as well, but I think with Pixel Federation we didn't have any caps, daily caps. Maybe that's why it hurts IIPs. But now when we released Tanks a lot 2 weeks ago, I think we have frequency cap on 3, but we are playing with that maybe 5, 6, and then 8. Probably that's the sweet spot, maybe.
And when taking in consideration rewarded video, how do you actually measure performance, and what is a good performance for you guys? I know we briefly touched on this, but...
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that we were using the average revenue per daily engaged user, which is a good way for us to track long-term performance. And once we've started doing this, it's been helpful in just focusing our attention beyond just kind of maybe like vanity metrics if we're trying to increase impressions or increase the things like the eCPMs. But it's different when we're talking to networks that we're working with. So we tried using things like the ARP-DO in order to communicate to networks things if we wanted to like guarantees. And it's like we're speaking gibberish because for a few reasons. One, it's not commonly used. Number two, it's not a metric that they can necessarily, the other networks or partners can see very well and optimize on. So for external communications, we're using just eCPM since it's the gold standard there.
Is it the same for you?
Not sure, but if we're, yeah, I think I said that before. Basically, it's the what we're looking at is the participation of DAUs, how many are they watching, and I think, yeah, so basically, good starting point is 4 or 5 ads per user per day, but that depends a lot on the game, and something that I think is really interesting, what we're starting to get now is user-level data on the ads, so basically the revenue per user, which is a game changer in that aspect, because you can, like, you know much more information about the users, and the revenue you are generating by player.
Yeah, well, I'm the end, so pretty much the same, pretty much the same for everybody.
Good. And can you guys give us an overview of what it took for you to find the correct positioning of the ads in the game? Did you have to play around, especially in the initial phases? What did it take?
Do you want to start?
Yeah, well, we played, like I said, we tested ads and we put the placement on the main monetization driver in the game, so that's why it hurt the IIPs. But then we played with all other placements like speed ups and probably, like you mentioned, the double the revenue side and stuff like that. And we tested this for a couple of months, and it's really crucial to find the proper placement for ads.
And do you show ads to all users?
Actually, yeah, we started showing ads for all users, but then there was a really big discussion with BI team about how to segment those users and not to show ads to payers, but then it's an ongoing process.
Yeah, for us it's also like very iterative, especially if you are a publisher that has very different games with very different ideal ad placements. You just test, you play around, you have ideally, I don't know, 5 placements and then see which one works best, optimize frequency, pacing, capping, all those things, and the rewards, of course. So the way we do it usually is we try to find organic placements of the ads, so basically something that makes sense, so it's not an interstitial, but something where the user has a need that can be met, like you die, you get a revive, or something like that. So that's the placements that we're trying, and then we test different approaches in terms of payout as well. So you get per video you get 300 coins or 200 or 100. What has the best results? So we go with our best guess, so basically an educated guess from the experts in that field. We do one that is more aggressive, one that is less aggressive, and then one approach that has no ads, and we look at which approach is the best. And then normally, like, the more aggressive and the no ads are underperforming, so you try to find the balance between the other two and like iterate and optimize until you've found your sweet spot.
Fantastic. And
just one thing to add. I would like to add that it's really hard to find a proper placement to a game that's like 5-year-old. So it was quite a ride for us. But now with all the new games, it's kind of easy because it needs to, the ad monetization needs to be in like the part of the game loop. So it makes sense for a player to watch the ad.
And in regards to rewarded video, what rewards are you actually offering your players? And do you think it's important to have the right rewards for your players?
Yeah, of course, it's the incentive to the players, and I think like the double reward, the thing like you mentioned, the double revenue for a couple of hours. That's really good way for a player to watch an ad.
Yeah. So in terms of what kind of rewards, we rarely give out like hard currency, for example, but more in terms of things that you would normally buy for hard currency, like a time skip, excuse me, for example. And yes, finding the right balance is extremely important because you want people to engage with the ad, but at the same time, yes, you don't want to cannibalize your IP revenue. So yeah, it's a lot of iteration and it can change over time as well.
Yeah, we also hardly give out hard currency for the ads. We are in Idle Factory Tycoon, our newest game. But I think the other thing that's important for us when we're thinking about where we're putting the ads is in pacing of the ads. So if the first ad is when they first enter the game, we don't want to have something else they need to do immediately in order to, and need to watch an ad immediately afterwards. So there's some content, right, that's the actual game itself. So they're playing that, and then they reach a point where, say they want, they're about to leave. Okay, so there's like the exit one, but in between there's also the opportunity to either get premium currency in the new game, which we're trying, or an idle miner if they're in the process of building and we hit them with a time gate, then we give them an ad there. So there's still more they can do after they finish building, more optimizations for a while, and then something they can do when they leave. So I guess it's sort of like a beginning, middle, and end sectioning for the ads.
And at what stage of the app development do you start thinking about where to position the ads, and generally thinking about ad placements at what stage of the development?
We have a blueprint right now, which we use for just the first ad. So we know that works really, really well. And so that's usually the first thing that we'll implement once we start adding monetization. Our process is pretty iterative, and so I'm sure we're not the only ones there. So when we first release a game, there's no monetization, and then maybe about 6 to 8 weeks into our beta test, then we'll add in one of the elements from the blueprint, right? So that like first entry ad, and then slowly along the way we'll add a few more with just placeholders until then. Okay.
Yeah, well, like I said, I think it's really important to think about ads just from the beginning of the creative process of the game, and and implement that into the core loop so as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think so. Basically, you know more or less from the beginning whether or not ads are going to be a thing in general with the kind of game you're making, especially like as a marketing person, there's some guidance that I can give saying, okay, this is a very young audience, for example, it's going to be hard to monetize them. Probably video ads are a good source of revenue there. And then basically we wait for the first monetization data to come in, like the first reliable ones, when you have an actual, like, statistically significant cohort of payers and so on, to see what your IP revenue is going to be like, and then based on that, try to put the ad revenue on top. That's the approach we're having, and not cannibalize, so to say. So it's really early as well, because as you said as well, and I totally agree, it needs to make sense. If you add it in later, then it doesn't feel good, and you will never have the same engagement.
Yeah, it doesn't flow. So we're now moving into the end of Q3 and very close to Q4. So at MoPub we see a big increase in brand spend, CPMs go up. Does seasonality affect the balance between IAP and ads? So when moving in Q4, for example, does anything change in the balance for you guys?
We definitely see an increase, an uptick, especially like among brands in Q4. I think it's also sort of tempered a little bit in terms of the CPMs that you're going to see, because at the same time we'll also have an increase in our total volume of players, particularly if we're running events, which we're doing more and more of in our games. So it's probably a bit of a trade-off there in favor of a slight inflation during the winter months due to seasonality.
Yeah, we see the seasonality too. Funnily enough, last year not so much as the year before, for example. But so it's most obvious in Q4 clearly, but you see like the revenue going up and down, or the CPMs going up and down to a smaller degree even before, like summer holidays or back to school. Then it drops because like people are playing less because vacation time is over. So it goes like a little bit like this over the year.
Yeah, well, it's Q4, so everybody wants to spend as much as possible. So yeah, we see the CPMs go up, but it's lean towards the Christmas, usual thing in Q4, I guess.
And do you guys treat iOS and Android differently when it comes to IAP and ad monetization, or do you treat them the same?
I think for the longest time we sort of thought of Android players as being less valuable, so we would have lower expectations when it came to the ad performance. Our games tend to advertise really heavily with high-end Android devices, so we see that there's a bit more parity between the two platforms. But the biggest differentiator for us is China, right? Because we have our game released on iOS in China. We don't have it in Android. So when we're doing optimizations, we typically have to spend time optimizing Tier 1 Android, Tier 1 iOS, and then China we kind of put in its own category, since the network performance is usually completely different than what we're seeing with the other territories.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, yes, you can segment the treatment by platforms, but that's not necessarily the first one we do, or there's other factors playing into that, more importantly, like payers, non-payers, or country, like you say. I mean, the exact same thing, non-stop night in China, also only on iOS, so that is a whole different beast. Yeah, that's quite significant in volume.
Yeah, well, it's kind of easier because Pixel Federation games are not in China, so we treated iOS and Android the same way.
And this leads us to our last question. So LTV is a crucial metric for an app's success. How important is it for you to get a complete picture of your audience's LTV?
Well, I think you mentioned this earlier, that sort of like the smarter monetizers now, and marketers in particular, are spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to get a complete look at the LTV with ad monetization in mind. So previously there was like, here's the LTV of your players based around the IAPs. We know exactly always where, who's spending, when they're spending, what platform, how much they spent. But advertising was a little bit of a black box. And there have been some like approaches to this. I think there's a company called Sumla that like tries to do this. We do this internally, where we've started working much more closely with all of the ad networks in order to get in our mediator, in order to get all of that data specifically for players. and the way we've had to do this thus far has been kind of a hybrid approach. We know from some networks everything. We know who the advertiser is. We know how much they bid, just like the CPI, right? We know the country and of course all the player information. And from others, we know maybe a few things, 3 variables: country, device. And so what we'll do is sort of a hybridization of the two in order to figure out what our player values are. I think in the future we're hopefully just going to have the precise value, because the hybrid is kind of dubious at best.
Yeah, so I think there's, to me, there's 2 aspects to that. Like we touched upon first, yes, of course, it's important. Like if you run UA campaigns, for example, you want to be ROI positive. If you base that only on IAP revenue, you're going to have a hard time if 50% of your revenue is coming from ads. So, of course, you take that into consideration. And yeah, the other thing, I forgot now. But yeah, maybe it will come back.
Yeah. Well, in terms of LTV, the combination of ads and IIPs may be taken into consideration as organic as well. Allows us to bid higher and to spend more money in terms of UA. So yeah, well, we like to count ad monetization and IIPs and organics into the LTV model. So it's better for us.
Oh yeah, it came back to me. So basically this user-level data on the ad performance is really interesting as well, because that enables also a different kind of UA campaign, for example. Like you could target actually people who are engaging with ads more than with IAPs. And yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I think it's about time. So, yeah.
Amazing, thank you very much. I think we're right on time and we have a few more minutes for any questions, if there are any.
I just want to add, particularly when we first met, the level you guys were at with the idle miner was like, yeah, this is kind of interesting, how the retention going to work. The transformation of the level of detail that you guys are looking at between then and now is astounding. And I think, I've seen the same thing with you guys at Flare Games. The level of detail and analysis that we're doing to make these techniques work is incredibly useful. So please pay attention to what these guys are saying. Does anyone else have any questions? We're going to try and get a mic to you.
I've been wondering if there's any difference in the eCPM compared to if your game is all the players in your game are very engaged, because everyone's trying to get that high eCPM. And so have you seen any difference, for example, if you have 2 products that are somewhat similar, but on the other one the churn rate is much higher, which means that users might drift from your ads to another game because they are bored at that game, and then some games you have very, very high engagement rate, so they, no matter what kind of ads you show them, they will stick to the game, so that would result in lower IPM and CTR.
So actually, since I'm not working with the platforms to negotiate those deals, I can only say what I've heard, and that is that we have seen really good eCPMs in our games. So basically, people who've worked in the industry for a while and have like benchmarks and so on, and they can negotiate with the platforms and trying to make good deals. They have a really good hand with some of our titles because the users are of high quality, because they are installing and so on. So there is definitely a difference, and good integration, ad integration does have an impact on the eCPMs that you can get with that.
Yeah, sorry, I was reluctant to take it because our games are super similar, at least in terms of like the overall mechanics. So most of the variation that we see is not due to like the initial engagement, which is generally about the same with the titles, but the eCPM differences will come from the total volume. So we have one game that is like much more Western focused and is much smaller, so the eCPMs of course look great. But the other title is a little bit more global. We have a lot more organics, which tend not to be as high performing on either side. So the eCPMs tend to be a bit on the lower side. But I think it really just depends on the country mix and the total volume. I also think that as your game gets bigger, there's probably like marketers who are much smarter than I, who are looking specifically at the quality of user that's being derived from your title. And if you hit a certain threshold, right, where they're getting a lot of users, they're probably going to be making more active changes to their bids per title that will have a huge impact on your CPM. So if you're flying below the radar, maybe that's not even something they're looking at.
Yeah, but then comes into play that, yes, we have a portfolio, for example, and high eCPMs because the users are quality are great, but at the same time, it's like, do you want to push them out of your portfolio? Is it maybe a better idea to cross-promote them with an ad in the same placement to another one in your portfolio? Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Any more questions? We have a question over there. I'll come back to you in a second.
Thanks. Matthew, you mentioned that it doesn't make sense to perhaps start doing any in-game advertising for games that are over 5 years old. But what about games that are trying to, let's say, extend their product life cycle, so to speak, that had already had quite a lot of success in IAP, but now want to try and experiment more? Do you advise this completely not, or?
No, I didn't want to say it doesn't make sense. It's just really hard to find a proper placement for ads, and that's it. And it will take a long time to find a proper placement, and that's it. It's just an iterative process and a long way to find that. But it makes sense for sure.
I've
it's
actually
just too
had
hard.
to do that work recently for a client, and we actually haven't released the game, so we don't know the data yet, but it is a tough job to do. But I think the way we tackled it is look at the utility value for the player, and if you can find ways that you can basically foreshadow the value of the IAPs they're buying anyway, you kind of have a much better way of finding the right point to promote the ad, because it's like a gateway element, so it feels there's less friction as a result. And it's always focused on, well, for me anyway, reduce friction, increase utility, then people like the ads, and in fact actually demand them. I mean, is that fair? Yeah.
Yeah, I think as well, like maybe you will see the IP revenue going down to a degree, but I mean, what you're looking at ultimately is the LTV overall. So maybe that is still like something where there's potential.
In this particular one, the soft launch tests, we actually had an increase in IAP, which is great, but it's not confirmed until it's out there. So, yeah. Yeah,
that's something we've seen as well. It's like that actually you would think that there's the IAP users and the ad users, and it's absolutely not the case, because the users who are purchasers are the highly engaged users, and they are going to use everything in the game to get as much out of it as possible, and that means that they are actually the ones who watch the most ads as well.
It's one of the things that really drives me mad is people putting in this buy to get rid of ads. Because every single time I've seen it done, the very people who watch the most ads are the ones who spend the money anyway. You've just lost all this potential. So, I mean, sorry, that's my experience. I don't know about you guys. Yeah.
You can do that, but you need to put a much higher price point on that.
Precisely.
Than you would expect.
Precisely. I think I can sneak a very, very quick question here, and then I'm afraid we're going to have to call for lunch, because lots of people are getting hungry, I'm sure.
Just really short to what Simo said before. Is there actually a difference in churn rate after implementing ads?
Always had ads.
No, I mean, that's what we're looking at when we are assessing the integration, right? What's the engagement and what is the impact on retention and conversion and so on. So we go with the approach that does not have a negative impact on retention.
Yeah. So it's one of the most common question. I mean, it came up all the time when I was still working at Unity on ads, and all the data was, it doesn't. If it is affecting you, it's because you've done it wrong. But the biggest thing I found when we were doing this analysis was that often people weren't paying enough attention to LTV. So, for example, interstitials, I found, quite often was a problem, because it may be giving you great money up front, but actually LTV was going down. but it's hard to judge because LTV is a nightmare to work out what's the right way to judge it. Depends on your methodology. And do you call it 60-day, 90-day? What is real life to...
We call it RPI for that reason.
Yeah, exactly. On that note, I think I'm going to have to say thank you very much, guys.
Thanks a lot for attending. Enjoy your lunch.
Thank
give
you.
it up for Thomas for
Thanks,
his first
Nate.
panel.
Thanks, Frederica. Thanks, Matty. I know it was Frederica's birthday yesterday, so happy birthday.
Happy birthday yesterday.